Hello and welcome to the HR People Pod, the CIPD's fortnightly podcast bringing you the topical stories, incredibly expert insights from my panel here today that are impacting the profession and the world of work more broadly. My name's David D'Souza and I work for the CIPD, and joining me in the studio here today we have...
Caroline Roberts.
And what's your background, Caroline? Just because you said that like you're a footballer with one name. I'm Pele.
I work as an HR director. I'm currently at the King's Fund as HR director there. Had an early career making radio programmes and working in the media before going over to the dark arts of human resources.
Perfect. The questions do get easier from here on in. And we also have...
Sarah Mason. So I'm a Chief People Officer at a global STEM workforce consultancy, which is a bit of a mouthful. So I focus on staffing and providing project solutions. And I've generally focused most of my career in recruitment or a state agency, very sales-focused companies. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much. Pleasure to have you here. Just before we get started, a reminder to anyone listening, we deal with general themes here. So we take them from the news and what's happening in the world of work. But our idea isn't to pick on a company in their practice. It's to say actually more broadly what's going on here. How should organisations think about it and draw on the expertise and knowledge that we have in the room. So just before we kind of plough into things more broadly, over the last week or two, what things have been catching your attention? It might be things that you've been reading, things that you've been watching. Caroline, if I start with you.
Well, at the moment I'm reading, and I've been saying this for a while because it's a very, very long book. I'm reading Citizens by Simon Sharma, which is a very, very long book about the French Revolution. But it has some interesting standpoints like the role of women in the French Revolution and the lack of their rights and things like that. And there are a lot of parallels as well in the way that people have been treated, except they've resorted to revolution. Hopefully there will be no revolutions near me in the next few months. But I'm a passionate believer that you can learn a lot about the present from the past.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah.
What have I been reading and looking at? Reading the Let Them theory, which I think is quite a big popular one at the moment, which I'm loving.
Yeah, everyone's talking about that.
It's so good. It's like it's got a mix of psychology, a mix of ACT therapy, if you think about it. How do we manage our emotions, manage other people's emotions around us? Very, very good. Honestly, it's worth a read, or I'm listening to that on an Audible book. And then I've been watching Black Mirror, because I think that is obviously nailing it at the moment. If you haven't watched it, it's dark. Have a look at it on Netflix. I've watched all of the series. I'm just on the new series at the moment. It's very edgy. And it's an eye-opener. So if you haven't watched Black Mirror, I'd give it a go.
The early ones...
Dark, very dark.
Like, well, really dark. Is it less dark, this series?
I think it's as dark. Yeah, it's still pretty dark, yeah. Worth a go, though.
Excellent. Yeah. I'm still toying. I'd like my 15-year-old to get access to that level of, I think, critical thinking and vision that Charlie Brooker's got. I'm not sure I wanted to access some of the other stuff that happens in that programme. So we'll gloss over that. Excellent. And I'm reading, I think it's probably my third or fourth of these in a row, books on why people make mistakes, the quality of evidence, how you get better critical thinking into systems. It's by the authors of The Invisible Gorilla and the people who architected that experiment. So for anyone who doesn't know, there's a video that you can watch. I'll spoil it for you all now. But essentially, they ask you to count the number of passes between basketball players, and what you don't notice because you're so intently focused on that is someone in a gorilla suit coming into shot, waving and then running away. And the idea is that our level of attention to one thing precludes us being able to pick up signals on another. So I'm enjoying that. That's super fun. I'm also enjoying a bit of sun. So I think sometimes it's good to turn off, isn't it? So just before we get going, we are... consistently talking about things that come up in the news. One thing that in the UK in particular has been of interest to professionals over the last few weeks has been a Supreme Court ruling which happened on the 16th of April, which was about specific definitions within the Equality Act, in particular around sex and the implications that would have for what's meant by the name kind of the words man and woman. There was clarification by the Supreme Court on the reading that should be taken of that. Since then, the EHRC, so the Equality and Human Rights Commission, has published what they're describing as an interim update describing the implications of that. It's causing lots of challenges for practitioners attempting to work out the best way to work out the implications of this, and also the practical implications of this as well, I think, for their organisations. We won't be covering that in detail in this episode because actually there's a lot still developing in that space. What we are doing is we're in contact regularly with the AHRC, we're in contact with ACAS, who will also have a role to play here in terms of what's happening in the workplace. We're inviting our members to contribute their views, observations, concerns. Also, if you found ways to solve some of these challenges or problems in your organisation, I'm sure the AHRC will be glad to hear that as well through the consultation period that will happen in May. So wanted to just acknowledge that that has been happening and that practitioners are wrestling with it. We will be guided by the statutory guidance when it comes out. And it's worth reminding that there's probably two obligations that professionals should be aware of at the moment. One is the obligation to remain legal in their activities. The second is the obligation to treat all people with compassion, even where there's a difference of views. So I'm sure we'll come back to it, and I know we'll come back to it in our guidance and our tools, and we'll update them as the situation develops. But I wouldn't want people to think that we weren't acknowledging that. Equally, at the moment, I think it's important to follow the cues that are given by the organisations that are in this space, but also to keep the conversation going. So from that point, please do look out for your ability to feed into it. We take our members' voice really seriously. Moving on to the first topic of today, that isn't that, this feels like going back in time to the start of my career. We're talking about the suggestion box, which feels like slightly antiquated, but is really important to employee voice potentially. So it's being dusted off from what we're calling the Museum of Employee Engagement. Is there a new version of 2025? So traditionally, it would have been an anonymous and perhaps underutilized tool. Originally, it genuinely would have been in many organizations a box with a hole in the top of it where you wrote a thing and stuck something in it. Major employers like JP Morgan and Amazon are reportedly embracing a digital version of that, where it becomes easier for employees to suggest ideas, suggest improvements, create a kind of focus on what may be operational, strategic opportunities. I guess my question to you two is, did it ever disappear? Is this just people discovering a new thing that's really an old thing? But secondly, what's the power of feedback and how can that change and drive organisations?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I do remember the old school ones where you'd have an old biro on a string normally, and you'd write something, and every week you'd go through it, and it might have things like, tell Janice not to steal my sandwiches. So you'd have some grievances in there. You'd have can we get paid more money, as well as some.
It's an impressive message to send, isn't it? We'd like to hear from you, but we're scared that you'll steal the pen.
Exactly.
There's two things going on there, really, in terms of organisational culture.
Such a thing, but I think, and I think these days, luckily, and we've moved on to employee engagement surveys, which have the ability for someone to give that kind of suggestion, but at least in a more measured way, because then you can see, is it just one person or is it many people? Having one person writing one thing without any context is unhelpful. Having it in an employee engagement survey, whilst they are flawed in many ways, I'm not suggesting they're perfect, they give a bit more use of data. So would I go back to the old school suggestion box? Probably not. Do I think there's value in allowing people to have suggestions? Yes, I definitely do. Yeah.
I remember having done a few jobs where there have been suggestion boxes, and rather embarrassingly, a few months later, someone said, "Do you know where the key is?" And eventually it'd be broken into after about a year, and they'd be found to be one solitary piece of paper.
So lots of sweet wrappers. Was that the way that
and the
went?
pen was chewed. It was always chewed as well. So I'm not so sure how well used they were. I think if you've got good employee networks and employee representative groups, they can be brilliant. The problem is if particular interest groups take those over and people feel afraid they can't say anything. And I think part of the role of the HR leader is often to be the person spotting the gorilla in the passes. There can be things going on and you might be the only person who sees those things, and they can really affect an organisation. So I can see the validity, particularly of having an online one. I would always much rather they weren't anonymous, that people felt that they could have a chat and they wouldn't be that wouldn't be discriminated against. They wouldn't be not heard respectfully. But I think there is the value of that kind of feedback, the off the cuff. But I think at the same time, having really good trained employee representative groups is a better way forward to distill some of the Janice stealing your sandwiches kind of issues that can take over.
Yeah.
I think they work really well when they're directed. So if you can get people away, I guess, from those hygiene pieces and around the environment, and start hearing from people who are really proximate to customers, or might be able to see things that the organisation should obviously be doing or might want to do, and suggesting those, that could be really powerful. When I first started years ago at M&S, I remember in kind of the induction, we always use the word induction. I like to call it welcome. When they welcomed me to that organisation, one of the stories they said was they used to give a slice of the savings or the kind of money generated by anything that was suggested back to the employees. And they said one employee took home, it was a massive amount of money, because they allegedly, and I don't know if it was made up, with a person that suggested M&S started advertising the products on the side of the lorries for distribution. And they hadn't thought of it centrally, and that came from an individual. And I think focusing people's attention on what you want to know and learn as an organisation could be really powerful. You mentioned engagement surveys. Do you think they're the same thing?
I think they're similar. I think engagement surveys, it depends on how you run them, but they generally have an element of suggestion across a range of topics. And they should have, most engagement surveys have real open boxes where people can put in whatever they want. So because engagement surveys generally by their nature cover pretty much most topics in the workplace, apart from stealing sandwiches. I appreciate there isn't a topic about Janice, but I think, there's an element of people should have opportunities, to put forward views on pretty much anything. So that there's enough similarity with me there. The topic you raised, I think, is a good one around anonymity. Again, should it be anonymous? Should it not be? I think that's worth getting into, because I think part of it is often alluded to around trust. Do people trust the employer? Is there psychological safety? But part of it is just simple bias, right? So social desirability bias. People, when they know their survey isn't anonymous, will often put responses down where they want to be perceived positively. So you've got to take into account the bias when anonymity is taken away. But whether it's a survey or a suggestion box, whether it's anonymous or not, getting people to suggest things that are valuable and then play it back to them, whether it's valuable or not, is the key bit for me.
And I think it's playing back to the organisation, isn't it, as well? I mean, I think it genuinely is worth rewarding people. It's worth recognising people. If you want that level of focus on organisation improvement, rather than I'm just doing my job, but I'm looking for how we could all do our jobs better, I think it's not anonymous or not. I think you want the opposite, which is people are incentivised to get associated with, that's what we want here. We want people getting up every day and going, how can we do things better?
And choosing appropriate questions as well in the survey. Yeah. I've seen some really good ones, but some of them, they're phrased in the kind of way that would be very, very overly positive as well. And sometimes when the engagement scores are linked to bonuses as well, the people who've created or signed off the survey can have extremely positive things, like how great do you think your leader is on a scale of 10 to 100?
Oh dear.
But getting the right questions, because some of the questions people end up sometimes just ticking the wrong things and just writing anything, because by the time they get to the end of the survey, they're feeling quite angry and fed up.
I can see that. It's an interesting one. And the bonus one, I often get that comment from a few of our employees, because people can get cynical about the idea of bonuses linked to engagement. And again, is it good or is it bad? I think often, rightly or wrongly, PLCs aligned to the corporate governance code have to find a way to measure culture for their non-execs, right? And often, rightly or wrongly, the easiest way to measure culture is through an engagement score. It's benchmarked against other companies. It's numerical. Boards will up a figure, a KPI.
It can go up or down.
It can go up or down. It's neat. And actually, rightly, your board should be measured on culture. They should have an engagement score linked to their bonus, because it demonstrates they've got the one of their stakeholders, their employees' best interest at heart. So it's often seen as, oh, isn't it terrible they're gaming their engagement score? But often it should be. I agree, and I have seen a lot of that. What I'd look for is benchmarking around professional benchmarks, absolutely. And that's why a lot of companies use the kind of ones that they can benchmark against a number of companies. But I agree, I've winced at some of the engagement surveys I've seen out there. Yeah.
Look, I'm going to leave here. I'm going to ask my team for ideas, but I'm also going to ask them to rate me on a scale scale of 1 to 100 and how great I am.
You don't start at 1. It's got to be at least 80.
Yeah, I'll say it. Look, rate me 1 to 100. The numbers available are 90 to 100. So we've touched on employee voice there, and I guess the different mechanics for it. When we do a few regular pieces of work that people should be aware of. We do a regular labour market outlook, which looks at hiring sentiment, a number of different things. So if you want to know the landscape your organisation's operating in, is it going to be tough? Is it going to be easy to find people? What are other people doing? Have a look at that. We also do one called our Good Work Index, which looks at dimensions of good working quality and more detail. On our 2023 index, 1 in 5 people reported having no employee voice channel available to them whatsoever. That included a one-to-one with their manager. They appear to be living a blissful, disconnected experience, and we'll come on to what you get paid for in a little bit. But employee voice is really important for a number of reasons, around conflict, around improvement, around feeling valued and autonomy. But also it's really important because sometimes when things go very wrong, you need to have a channel for that. So it's been reported this week, following an independent workplace culture review at the BBC, that there have been incidents of employees being punished for speaking out and put off raising issues due to fears of protecting the organisation's reputation. The BBC's published an action plan alongside that, and we won't concentrate on the BBC exclusively, but there's a broader conversation here around what happens in cultures where speaking up isn't encouraged and the potential implications of that. So, Caroline, I won't ask you to talk about your time at the BBC unless you'd like to, but actually I know it's a subject close to your heart in terms of people being able to raise their voice when they do have challenges. What do organisations need to do to create those right channels, and what are the consequences of getting it wrong?
I think it's really important that and this does a lot, come down to the HR function as well, that the HR leader can be safe in talking about certain things, can talk about things that could be potentially career limiting. I remember working for a really, really great guy once who said, "You can say what you like because I'll give you air cover." And that was so reassuring, and it meant that you could really tackle some systemic issues. But definitely I've had experience where you do raise something and you know that your career will go no further in that organisation. You may not be invited to some meetings, things will be hidden, people disappear. That's, of course, it's not ideal, but that's a reality of many businesses. It goes on an awful lot. There was a lot of talk a few years ago around NDAs and things like that being used. But there are lots of companies, both small and some very large household names, where these things do go on. And it is very much down to individual leaders, I think, and the CEO setting the tone as well, that you can actually deal with these. And sometimes it only takes one test case, if you like, to actually change a whole culture and how people believe they're going to be treated with things. The other aspect to it is training your managers through a whole range of scenarios. Get some real scenarios from your employees as to the kind of things they might encounter and work through those, and so people can see the logical conclusions. But I think firmly rooting it in practicality and not having rose-tinted spectacles because these things do go on.
Yes, and on that point, these things do go on. I think it's really key because I think particularly for anyone listening to the podcast who's joined the HR profession and they're at the start of their career, that can be quite fearful. If something happens on my watch, what do I do about it? And I think it's reassuring for them to hear these things happen, and they're going to happen, and you will never stop them from happening. And HR's job isn't to ever stop that from happening, because that's unrealistic. People will say and do whatever they choose to say and do. What we have to always be mindful of, our job is to react to it. So we get judged on our reaction, not the person's behaviour. If people behave in a way that's rogue, right? Obviously we can do what we can to prevent it. Code of conduct, values-based organisations absolutely prevent those behaviours. But when it happens, because it will happen, and it'll happen a lot, otherwise you wouldn't need an HR department, frankly. I do joke if people behaved, I'd be out of a job. There's an element of that. But when it happens, it's about how we respond. And that's really important because, first of all, don't worry about the behaviour, just worry about your response. Everyone can hopefully take some comfort in that. But secondly, be very aware you will be judged for your response, right? And you should be. So HR leaders who are responding in a certain way, they are going to be judged on that. All of the leadership team will. And HR don't operate in a vacuum. They need the tone from the top, I agree. But it's really key that people focus on our response to this is what we get judged on. Is it defensible? We talked about before, Dave talked about, is it moral, legal and commercial? How do we respond in a way that covers a basis? It's right for the organisation, it's legally robust, and it's the right thing to do. And sometimes it's tricky to align those three, but organisations are full of people who will judge the leaders on it.
And often the HR leader will be the person who gets hauled across the coals for these things as well. And I think, we've all seen select committees where they've had the HR leader there, and you think, but it wasn't their fault. What are they doing there?
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. You are often held accountable for your reaction to these things.
Yeah.
And it's difficult in many ways to reconcile what can appear to happen to one individual with the fact that largely, I think, well, I'll see if you both agree. If there is someone doing bad things, they quite often do bad things on a regular basis. And it is the unsaid thing in the organisation, but kind of acknowledged behind the scenes, which means that symbolic piece around the response that you both spoke about. You said, it can only take one incident to actually change the way people think about it, because they'll understand the way you'll deal with it. So if there's something bubbling under the surface, a large number of people will know that, and it will become if your culture is your kind of unwritten assumptions around the environment and the response in it, if what you've got is someone repeatedly doing bad things, and that people are pretty sure the senior leadership team knows something's happening and nothing's being dealt, that has massive ramifications. But to your point, the opposite is true, which is you can resolve it in private, or you can resolve it in a local space, and people come to understand quite rapidly that if something happens here, something will be dealt with.
And it's how you talk about it afterwards. I've worked in organisations where they've been very open about something. Perhaps someone has been dismissed for a particular reason, or there has been a tribunal case, and they have tackled that, and then they have discussed it with staff. And other organisations where they've said, it's purely recreational. That's a very common one. People were okay with that. That's the culture. That's the way, it happens in lots of other places where they try and downplay it, and being open about it always seems to have the best outcome.
And that's interesting, because lots of organisations naturally aren't. They treat it as a behind the scenes issue that's being dealt there. So for anyone listening, that's probably something you're saying, done it, seen it, open about it, grown up about it, and actually had a positive impact rather than backing away from it, which is really practical advice to kind of give people. Any final thoughts on this one before we move on?
All I would say is I think we get the behaviour we tolerate. So if we tolerate a set of behaviours, then that is a behaviour that is in an organisation. And I think you do often get either pockets of top talent who might get protected. I can understand that can happen in organisations. Again, people take their lead from that. And I think it's for the leadership to make clear signals what behaviour is tolerated in the organisation. They cannot be surprised if they see those behaviours everywhere if they are tolerating them. So there's an element of what is accepted and what isn't, I think.
And what I'd say really practically, for anyone in a situation where there is something that they are aware of and they're uncomfortable, you have to deal with it. Our code of conduct and ethics is really clear on it. As a profession, it's your job to step towards that space. That doesn't make it any less profoundly uncomfortable for it. And I remember the first time it happened to me, and I had to step towards something like that, and I was like, I don't know if I'm still going to have a job at the end of this, because I don't know how the organisation is going to react, because I was very junior in my career at the time as well. We've got a whistleblowing helpline if you need support there. We've got advice lines if you need support there. We've got the community, which is brilliant. Don't feel that you're alone, but also please don't think that if you just leave it, it's going to go away. I think would probably be my advice on both of those things. So we recognise, and I recognise, we've got a really senior and experienced group here. This stuff's harder the earlier you are in your career. But if you don't do anything, that, to your point around, it's what you walk by, that becomes actually a defining contribution, is your lack of action in that space. Going to move on to performance management. Never gets sexier than that, does it? I spoke to an organisation once, and they were asking me for advice on their performance management. I was like, "When have you left it the same for 2 years?" Someone started giggling, and they said, "It's been 40. I've been here 14 years, and we've changed it every year." And I was like, "Do you want essentially your kind of HR headstone? You're kind of like." You're kind of the way people remember you to be like, here lies this person's career. They changed the performance management approach every year that they were there, or that you really help people to perform and the organisations to excel. And there's a choice there, I think. So for anyone listening to it, performance management, don't tinker, have a philosophy and work to it and test it and experiment. But then, if you are going to revise, make sure that you're not doing that because it's busy work. I've just gone off on one there. We may edit this. I don't know. We may edit this. We may keep it in. But it's one that it's tempting to always change it. But we're going to talk about one financial tech company that's rolling out a points-based system, which has got hints of gamification about it, I think, where employees can earn or lose points based on how well they stick to risk and compliance guidelines. Yeah, it gets even sexier. Ultimately, points earned will go some way to determining payouts and bonuses for its workforce. The scheme has been pitched as a way to reward good behaviour and foster a healthy culture. It feels a lot like the points my daughter gets in school for good behaviour, bad behaviour, not attending, that kind of thing, where we get a report on a quarterly basis saying how she's doing. Is this a smarter way to implement accountability, or is it going to have lots of unintended consequences? And is it basically how you treat kids rather than how you treat adults?
I did recoil. From this
recoil,
one.
a proper recoil.
It was a proper recoil with this one.
Love a good recoil.
And I thought there are so many reasons. In terms of gamification, what game is it? Is it Game of Thrones? It could be
the game of risk and compliance, the most fun of all games.
And then you're thinking, gosh, here I am working in financial services. I could be innovative. I can come up with new ideas, or I could work somewhere where the psychological safety may be compromised by these things. I think for people, in terms of inclusion, for people who are neurodiverse, working with those kind of points-based systems may work really well or supremely fail. But then I actually sort of questioned my own bias here whilst I was busy recoiling.
So you're re-recoiling at this point?
I was re-recoiling. Yeah. I was rebounding and thinking, there are some organisations where actually, who cares about innovation? You do want to be compliant. If it works for them, go ahead. So I think with these things, I would test it, but I would probably work to the aphorism around fail fast. So if your points aren't working, just ditch them.
So interesting enough, I had the opposite reaction. I was generally thinking, what's the problem with that? I think it's absolutely fine. And I think obviously my background, I work in lots of sales-based companies where KPIs and metrics and goals is, it's part of the norm. And I think put the psychology in there, it's pure behaviorism. You've got reward driving behavior, and that's all the way through an organization, whether it works with toddlers and children. If you behave nicely, you get a sticker or a behavior point. In the world of work, if you behave nicely, you get promotion, you might get a pay rise, you might get a seat at the board, or in this case, a point for getting your compliance score up. So I think for me, the behaviorism element, I think, is fine. The idea of metrics, for me, the question is, are they having points linked to the right things? And if risk and compliance is important, great. I noticed it was a collective score, by the way, not an individual one. So as long as it's not points that drive poor behaviours, I think some companies have done that around peer feedback where they game it and it becomes political. As long as it drives the right outcome, as long as it drives the right behaviour, and that behaviour is in fact important to the company, compliance is important to financial services. Whereas if it was an innovative company, you'd have innovative points, wouldn't you? So as long as it drives the right behaviour, as long as it's not driving too much self-interest, as in someone wins and someone loses, you get the right outcome, you get the right behaviours, I'm good. I'm all good with that. And I see it all the time in sales organisations where it becomes problematic is it drives the wrong outcome or people game it for self-interest. And it's hard to find a system that you can't game, if I'm honest. There you go.
It is hard to find a system you can't game.
Yeah.
And so looking out for those unintended consequences with whatever you do is key.
Yeah.
I've yet to see something that someone hasn't found a cute way round. But
every time. Yeah.
This has. I sort of feel the same as Caroline, but if I were to step back, I'd say this has clarity, this has transparency, this has consistency, this has good alignment. That's a quite good start to designing a system. So I think my advice would probably be systems need to work for the context that they're working in. So to your point, if it's an environment where it works, then actually it could just be a really good piece of design. Equally, you could lift and drop, and this is the problem when organisations do that and go, what's someone else doing? What's in the news now? What's exciting? You lift and drop that into a different context, and suddenly actually it's a horrible way of doing things. So context is the ruler in that situation. So finally, we end up with our regular piece, which is it a thing? Which is something that is doing the rounds in the media or social media. And we say, is it a thing? Is it a new thing? Is it a thing at all? Is it happening in organisations? Has it been made up by someone? And this week we are dealing with job polygamy. So this is more than engagement. This is being married to several jobs at the same time. So we've seen a number of reports surface about a growing number of remote workers hoodwinking their employers by holding multiple full-time jobs at once without anyone knowing. Also dubbed overemployment, it sparked headlines after it emerged one civil servant was working 3 full-time government roles simultaneously. Firstly, if they're listening in, I'm really interested. That seems quite an interesting skill set. There's obviously some challenges around integrity there, but 3 jobs at once, quite impressive. And the stamina. So
and the reward charts.
And the reward chart. Performance management, they're smashing it in 3 different organisations. Is this a new thing? Is it a new trend? And what should managers be doing if they think someone might be a polygamist?
Shall I go for it? I'm happy to take it up.
Go first then.
I have had an incident of this in my career before. I think polygamy in my career, clearly, not in any other areas of my life.
Just clarify.
Absolute clarity. So is it a thing? Yes, but is it a new thing? No. So it's been around. As long as you're going to pay people money, they'll find a way of maybe making a bit more money. That's always been out there. Unfortunately, not widespread. We're talking small numbers. Most people are decent, but you get a couple of people. We talked about people gaming the system. That might include gaming. Their pay, right? So I think it's there. I think 2 things underpin someone's ability to do more than one job illegally. One would be motivation. Clearly, they're in it for something. Maybe it's money, maybe it's something else. And secondly, opportunity. And that's what makes this probably news. Is it because it's the whole work from home debate? There's lots of jobs where you don't work from home that you could have the opportunity to kind of hide a little bit. It depends. It's much easier for office workers these days if they're out of sight to maybe, have a couple of jobs. I can see how the opportunity arises now, but there's plenty of jobs out there where they're not in the sight of their line manager. And the way you overcome that is obviously much tied to line manager. And if you think about it, we're talking about performance management. The classic bar there is the manager's job is to ensure they deliver their work to acceptable standard. This is even lower, right? This is, do they deliver their work? We just want a manager to check someone's delivered their work. So my question is, how does someone not know that person hadn't delivered their work for a few years? There's an element of the line manager responsibility on that one, I think.
What if they're hypothetically using technology or other means to deliver successfully for 3 organisations? If you're getting the outcome that you need, is that a problem?
It depends on their contract. If the word is successfully deliver. If someone's delivering 3 jobs, I'd first of all go back to their contract and go, you're saying it's a full-time job, maybe it's not. Because if they're doing 3 full-time jobs in one, then the job spec's possibly a bit wrong. And secondly, what's in their contract? But if we're saying a job takes roughly full-time 40 hours a week, and you're saying someone can successfully deliver 3 of them, then something's a bit weird, I think.
Yeah, and also I think realistically, there's always whilst many organisations are moving towards that will judge you on the outcome, if I'm paying you to be available to us as an organisation for that amount of time, it's a reasonable expectation of an employer for you to be available for that amount of time. If you finish your job in 10 minutes, I'd expect you to be going, so what's next?
Doing something else.
That I can do because I'm getting paid. Caroline, when a side hustle instead becomes a triple hustle, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the media did pick on a very extreme case, and I think Sarah, you absolutely nailed your answer there. With it's about performance management, having some outcomes. I think in terms of how it really affects managers is sometimes where you've got somebody who may be going sick. I've come across, one worker who was going sick every Thursday or had a childcare problem, things like that, was actually working somewhere else on Thursdays. So it takes a while. It takes a disproportionately high amount of effort from the line manager. And by the time you've actually established that, they've moved on elsewhere. So I think that in the press, there was, an extreme example. And, they could have been working, 120-hour week, never sleeping. But I think the truth is more often like, with the job planning. What were they actually going to be delivering? Where was the contact with the line manager there? Where were they bringing people together? It sort of forgot all the principles of management. And also with some examples that, it's different parts of the same body where they're working. And you think, where's your HR system there? So I think often, it comes back to basics. Think about what the job is, think about the outcome, and also having some contact with your member of staff as well.
Thank you. So not always be hustling, just hustle an appropriate amount of time for your contract.
Legally. Hustle legally.
Always be hustling legally. Put that on a t-shirt. So that's all for us today. I'd like to thank our guests, Sarah and Caroline, for sharing your thoughts. And as ever, I'd like to thank our listeners. We'll include a link to a number of useful resources that we've discussed in the show today. As I say, there are some changing things in the legal landscape as well, and we will keep updating our resources there. And there will be new episodes of this every fortnight or so make sure that you subscribe to make sure that you catch one. I'm David Souza, and this has been the HR People Pod. Thank you very much.